72 collectors were in the room, and every single one of them was wrong. That morning, inside Sterling House, the oldest and most respected classic car auction in the northeastern United States, men and women in tailored suits and vintage chronographs sat shoulder to shoulder on leather chairs, sipping espresso from paper-thin cups, speaking in the quiet, self-satisfied tones of people who believed their wealth had given them an infallible sense of what things were worth. They had flown in from Chicago and London and Monaco. They traded names like Ferrari and Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo the way other people traded weather reports, casually, without wonder. Then the room went quiet, not because something beautiful entered, because something destroyed did. Lot 47 was pushed through the side door on a flatbed dolly, and the silence that followed was not reverence. It was the sound of a room full of experts looking at what they believed was nothing. The car was burned almost beyond shape. Its aluminum body had buckled in the heat, entire panels warped into abstract sculpture. The windshield had melted and re-solidified in long, frozen tears down what remained of the dashboard. The paint existed now only as a memory of ash clinging to twisted metal. The license plate, still partially attached, was so corroded that only 2 characters were legible. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Lot 47. European sports car, 1960s, source and chassis unverified. Severe fire damage. Condition as found. No guarantees. Opening bid, $500. He looked at the room. Not a single hand rose. A man in the front row, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wearing a watch that cost more than a new pickup truck, turned to the woman beside him and smiled in the particular way that powerful men smile when they want you to know they're above something. His name was Lawrence Whitmore, and he had been collecting classic cars for 31 years. He owned 4 Ferraris, 2 early Porsches, a Lamborghini that had once belonged to a European prince. He let the smile do its work for a moment. Then he spoke. "That thing's not worth the cost of hauling it to a scrapyard," he said, loud enough for the rows around him to hear. Several people laughed. At the back of the room, standing near the wall because he had not wanted a seat, a man in a gray mechanic's jacket did not laugh. He was 37 years old, 6 feet even, with close-cut hair and a short, neat beard. His hands were in his jacket pockets, but if you had looked closely, you would have seen the dark lines of engine grease pressed deep into the creases of his knuckles. The kind that soap does not fully remove, the kind that accumulates over years of working with your hands in the service of things that run. He had driven 3 hours to get here, leaving Philadelphia before 5 in the morning, and the tiredness sat around his eyes in the quiet, resolute way of a man who was used to being tired and had long ago stopped letting it slow him down. Beside him stood a girl of 6. She wore her hair in 2 puffs, held by purple elastics, and she carried a gray stuffed rabbit under her other arm with the casual authority of a child who takes her companions everywhere and expects the world to accommodate this. Her name was Imani. Her father's name was Malik Carter. Imani looked at Lot 47 with large, serious eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "is it dead?" Malik looked at the car, not at the crowd, not at the man in the front row who was still smiling, at the car. He looked at it for exactly 15 seconds. If you had been watching him instead of the wreckage on the dolly, you might have noticed something shift in his face. Not excitement, not greed, something quieter and more precise than either of those things. He raised his hand. The room turned. All 72 people rotated toward the back wall to look at the man in the gray mechanic's jacket. Lawrence Whitmore turned last. He looked at Malik the way men like Lawrence look at people they have already categorized. "Well," he said, "at least someone wants the scrap." More laughter, a little louder this time. Imani's face went still. A color moved into her expression that was not quite embarrassment and not quite anger, but sat somewhere between the two in the particular way of children who love someone and have just watched that person be diminished in a room full of strangers. Malik felt it. He always felt it. He crouched down to her level, one knee on the polished floor, and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Not everyone who laughs sees clearer than you," he said. He stood. He paid $500 for lot 47. Nobody said a word to him as he arranged for the car to be loaded. The auctioneer moved on to lot 48, and the room's attention slid away from Malik Carter like water off glass. None of them knew what he had seen in those 15 seconds of silence. None of them understood yet that this $500 transaction would become, within a week, the reason their phones would not stop ringing. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, because this story belongs to anyone who has ever been told their eye was wrong. Malik's garage sat on the outer edge of a neighborhood that Philadelphia's growth had not yet reached. It occupied the rear unit of a former service station, with a hand-painted sign on the bay door that read Carter and Daughter Auto Repair in uneven but confident capital letters. Imani had painted it 3 years earlier using borrowed house paints. Malik had kept it. Inside, the tools hung on pegboard in order of size. The floor was clean, not showroom clean, but workshop clean, which is a different standard and in its own way more serious. A wooden stool sat in the corner where Imani worked with her sketchbook during school holidays, drawing cars in the exaggerated proportions that children use when they find something beautiful. On the wall above the tool bench hung 3 photographs. The first was Lina, Malik's wife, taken on the front steps of a house they no longer lived in, laughing at something off camera, her hand blurred in motion. She had been 29 in that photograph. She had died at 32, from a blood clot that appeared without warning in a body that had given no prior indication of fragility. The speed of her death had been, to Malik, the cruelest part. She had been alive on a Tuesday and gone by Thursday, and he had spent the following 6 months reorganizing his entire life around a 3-year-old who kept asking when Mommy was coming back from the hospital. The second photograph was Samuel Carter, Malik's father, a tall man with a wide forehead and careful eyes wearing a tan canvas work apron, standing beside a partially formed car body in a workshop that was clearly not American. The light was grayer, coming through high industrial windows the way English light does in late autumn. Samuel was smiling the smile of a man who knows exactly where he is and is glad to be there. He had gone to England in 1971, 23 years old, with $60 and a recommendation letter from a vocational school instructor who told him he had the best eye for sheet metal the instructor had seen in a decade of teaching. He had found work in a coach builder's workshop outside Coventry that specialized in low-production European sports car bodies. He had been, for years, the only black man in the shop, and he had remained long enough and become skilled enough that the distinction had eventually stopped being the thing that defined him there, replaced instead by the reputation of his hands. Samuel had returned to Philadelphia when Malik was 4, bringing back not only his craft, but his insistence that his son learn to see what other people rushed past. "Don't look at the color," he had told Malik, who was 8 or 9, watching his father's hands move over a fender. "Color is what the owner chose, that's not the car. Look at the ratio. Look at the curves. Look at how the metal wants to sit. Every car has a shape it was always trying to be. The good ones found it." Samuel had died of heart failure at 61. Malik still heard his voice in the garage most days. The third photograph was a close-up detail shot, a section of aluminum body panel, illuminated at an angle to reveal texture. You could see the faint, rhythmic impressions left by a craftsman's hammer, spaced with the regularity of something almost mechanical, but not quite. Something that could only have come from a human hand, moving with great discipline over many hours. Malik had taken the photograph at an auto museum and hung it not as decoration, but as a reminder. Tyler Boone arrived at the garage 40 minutes after Malik did, in a truck that needed more than he currently had money to fix. Tyler was 37, with a broad, expressive face and the kind of good humor that tends to emerge in people who have decided that being cheerful is less exhausting than the alternative. He had worked alongside Malik for 4 years. He was not sentimental, and he was not inclined to romanticism. And when he saw the burned shell of Lot 47 sitting in the center of the garage, he stood in the doorway for a long moment with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "So," he said finally, "you actually did it." "Close the door," Malik said. Tyler stepped inside and walked around the car, once in the slow circle of a man making himself look at something he finds troubling. "Malik, I have seen people make questionable investments. But this," he gestured at the wreckage, "this is genuinely new territory. Come here. I don't want to come there." Tyler came. Malik pointed at the wheel arch on the driver's side rear. "Tell me what you see." "Burned metal. Look at the shape, not the damage. The shape." Tyler crouched. He looked longer than he initially intended to. "It's curved?" "How it curves. Follow it from here to here." Malik traced the line in the air without touching the car. "Now tell me what car that curve belongs to." Tyler straightened up. Something in his expression had shifted. Not yet certainty, but no longer dismissal. "I don't know enough about bodies like this to say." "I know," Malik said, "but I do." He paused. "I think." Malik did not rush. He sat in front of the car for 5 full minutes before he touched it. Tyler watched this in silence, then walked to the radio and turned it down further, because he had come to understand that Malik's silences deserved a certain courtesy. "You're doing the thing," Tyler said quietly. "The thing your dad used to do." "I'm letting myself forget the catalog," Malik said at last. "The auction house listed it as general production. But I can't look at it the way they listed it. I have to look at it the way it actually is." He reached for a soft brass scraper, the kind used for removing gasket material without scratching surfaces, and crouched beside the rear quarter panel. He worked very carefully, moving a small amount of carbon and oxidized material away from a section roughly 6 inches square. What appeared was aluminum, hand-formed aluminum, its surface textured with the kind of micro-impressions left by a body hammer in the hands of someone who knew how to use one. The impressions overlapped in a pattern that suggested deliberate strategy. A craftsman working from the outside of a curve inward, guiding the metal to a form that could not have been stamped by machine, because the tolerances were too specific and too personal. Malik held a work light at a low angle, almost parallel to the surface. The texture became clear. He stayed very still. His father's voice came to him, from a day in the garage 25 years ago. "Machines make sameness. Hands make memory. You can always tell which you're looking at if you look long enough." Amani, without looking up from her sketchbook, said, "Daddy, is it talking to you?" He said, "It's starting to." He reached for his phone. Arthur Bellamy had retired from coach building in 2009. After 40 years of working on some of the most technically demanding automotive bodies in English history. He was 78, his hair entirely white, his hands still large and steady. He had known Samuel Carter for 17 years and had sat with Malik once at Samuel's funeral and had said very little because he had been too moved to say much. When Malik's video call connected, Arthur answered on the second ring. He did not preface it, did not describe what he thought he might have. He simply turned the camera toward the car and moved it slowly, pausing where he thought it mattered. Arthur was quiet for longer than Malik expected. "That's a Valenti," he said. "I think so." "Don't say you think so, tell me what you see." "The wheelbase is 2 inches shorter than the catalog described. The A-pillar angle is steeper. The aluminum is hand-formed on the outside skin. You can see the hammer work under the carbon. The rear wheel arch has a specific curve I've only seen in hand-formed Valenti bodies, and there's a partial number on the firewall. GT, then a gap, then a B." Arthur exhaled slowly. "Don't say anything else to anyone," he said. "Those cars carry weight, the kind that brings out people who are not interested in the history, only in owning it." "I know. Do you have photos of the firewall?" "Sending now. And the inner door sill, and the underside of the rear wheel arch. Look for the mark of the coach building shop." Arthur looked at the images as they arrived. Then he looked at a specific curve on the rear wheel arch, and his voice went quiet and different. "Your father told me about that curve," he said. On the morning of the second day, Malik was already under the car at 4:30 when Tyler arrived. There was a half-empty coffee cup on the workbench that had clearly been there for hours. "You slept?" Tyler asked. "In the chair. And Imani?" "She's asleep. She woke up at midnight because she had a dream about the car. Tyler looked at the sleeping girl on the cot in the back office, gray pressed to her chest. What did she dream? Malik's voice came from under the car, muffled and careful. That it was trying to tell her its name, but she couldn't hear it, because there were too many people talking. Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then he handed the coffee cup down without being asked. Several minutes passed. Then, Tyler, yeah, come here. Tyler crouched at the side of the car, and Malik reached up and guided his hand to the lip of the rear subframe mounting bracket. Tyler held at the angle Malik indicated, stamped into the metal, partially obscured by fire residue, but legible under magnification. V12S07. Tyler looked at it for a long time. Tell me what that means, he said slowly. It means, Malik said from under the car, and his voice had taken on a quality that was not excitement but was something adjacent to it, something quieter and more solemn, that I need to call Arthur back. The Valenti Aurelia GT-S had been built in a small workshop in Turin between 1961 and 1964. Lorenzo Valenti, the workshop's founder, had produced exactly 12 cars before the business dissolved. He was a coach builder in the old tradition, a craftsman who believed that an automobile was not a product but an object, warranting the same attention given to fine furniture or hand-bound books. The cars he built were technically brilliant and visually distinctive, commissioned by private clients who understood they were not buying transportation, but commissioning an artifact. The 12th car built, number 7 in the GT-S series, had been finished in the spring of 1964. It had passed through 2 private owners in Italy, then been acquired by an English collector in the early 1970s. In 1981, a fire in the collector's storage facility had destroyed several vehicles. The GT-S, according to all available records, had been among them. The estate had filed an insurance claim. The car had been listed as a total loss. What had apparently not happened was the confirmed physical destruction of the vehicle. The fire had been real, the damage had been severe, but the car had traveled through a storage facility, then an estate sale, then a series of intermediate owners who had known only that they had a badly burned and unidentified vehicle from a liquidation, and had kept it in sheds and warehouses until it ended up, 43 years later, in the consignment records of Sterling House as a general estate clearance item. Arthur confirmed the chassis number against records he had kept from his own working years, photographs, measurement notes, the paper trail of a professional lifetime. Samuel Carter appeared in those records, not prominently, but specifically and unambiguously. A photograph of Samuel standing beside the partially completed body of the car that would become GT-S number 7. Samuel was not posing. He was working, his hands on the metal, and you could see from the photograph alone the quality of attention he was giving to what was in front of him. Arthur scanned and sent the photograph on the morning of the 3rd day. Malik received it at 6:17, sitting at the workbench, his father's hands, his father's posture, his father's complete absorption in the thing in front of him. He set the phone down, and for a moment just looked at the ceiling. Then Imani came out of the back office in her pajamas, hair flattened from sleep, and climbed onto the stool next to him without asking and looked at the phone. Is that Grandpa? Yes. She looked at the photograph, at the car in the background. She looked at the burned car across the garage. Daddy, she said slowly, as the connection formed in her 6-year-old mind. Is that the same car? I think it might be. Imani was quiet for a moment. Then she slid off the stool, crossed the garage and stood in front of the burned car. She reached out one hand, very carefully, and rested her fingertips against the aluminum of the wheel arch. The same wheel arch Arthur had identified, the one that bore the distinctive curve Samuel Carter had helped form 60 years ago. Hi, Grandpa, she said softly. Malik turned away before she could see his face. Word travels in closed professional circles with the speed and fidelity of a small town. Tyler had mentioned the car, in passing to a dealer he knew, and the dealer had mentioned it to someone else, and within 72 hours the phrase, Valenti GT-S, had entered circulation in the chat threads where serious collectors and their representatives talked. Margaret Sterling learned about it from her own staff. A junior cataloger knocked on her office door on a Thursday afternoon and placed a printed page on her desk without saying anything, which was how she communicated things she believed were serious. Margaret read it, then she opened the Lot 47 file herself. The appraiser's notes were cursory. The photographs were taken at distance and poor quality. The provenance research had taken less than 2 days and had concluded only that the vehicle's history was incomplete, which was technically true, but was not the same as saying it had been thoroughly investigated. They had listed it as scrap. They had opened it at $500. A mechanic from a one-bay garage in Philadelphia had been the only bidder. Margaret Sterling had been running Sterling House for 12 years. She was 51 years old, precise and disciplined, and she slept badly on nights when she had cause to worry. She had cause to worry now. "Mr. Carter," she said when Malik answered, in the tone of a person who has prepared their opening. "This is Margaret Sterling. We sold you Lot 47 last week. We've become aware of information suggesting there may have been an error in our cataloging. We'd like to offer you a buyback, $25,000, which is a very fair return on a $500 purchase." Malik was quiet. "You listed it as scrap," he said. "Assets found condition, no guarantees, that was the sale." "Yes, and we stand by the process. But given the potential misidentification, Malik repeated, careful and even. "So when it was scrap, you were comfortable with the sale. Now that it may be something else, you want it back." Margaret did not have a clean answer to that. "The vehicle may have significant historical value. We want to ensure it's properly handled. It's in a professional garage with a certified mechanic," Malik said. "It's being properly handled. Thank you for your call." He ended it. Tyler had been listening from 6 feet away, pretending to organize the tool shelf. $25,000, he said. "Yes, that's 50 times what you paid, yes. And you said no." "Yes." Tyler put down the wrench he'd been holding. "Malik, with complete respect, are you sure?" Malik looked at his hands, at the grease in the lines of his palms. "If I sell it now, they get to tell the story. They corrected a mistake, they sold a great car. Their reputation survives. The car goes into someone's private collection. My father's name gets filed somewhere in a provenance document nobody reads." Tyler was quiet. "If I keep it," Malik continued, "I control what happens next." "And what happens next?" Malik looked at the car. "The truth gets told. All of it." Lawrence Whitmore arrived at the garage 4 days later, without an appointment, in a black car driven by someone who was not introduced. He stood at the garage entrance and looked at the car, and then at Malik, and then at Imani in her corner, and his expression went through several private calculations before settling into something meant to resemble reason. "You're a smart man," Lawrence said, "so I'll speak plainly." Malik was cleaning a carburetor. He did not put it down. "I'll give you $100,000. The car needs resources to be properly restored. I have those resources. I have the contacts, the specialists, the facility. You have a one-bay garage and a client base that runs to oil changes. You're not equipped to do what this car deserves." Malik turned the carburetor in his hands, examining a specific passage. "You're right that I don't have the resources you have," he said. "Then let's talk practically. But I have something you don't." He set the carburetor down and looked at Lawrence directly for the first time. "I know what this car is, not because I read a catalog, but because my father helped build it." He paused. "You want to own this car because it's valuable. That's not why I have it." Lawrence's expression moved towards something that was not anger but was adjacent to it. "I can go up," he said. $200,000. Be reasonable. Mr. Whitmore, you told the room that morning the car wasn't worth hauling to the scrapyard. You were wrong. I'm not angry about that. You didn't know. But now that you know, you want to own what you dismissed. That's not restoration. That's recovery. And those aren't the same thing." Lawrence left. The number he had offered, on the way out, was $500,000. Malik said no to that too. A story appeared in a collector's magazine, in which Lawrence was quoted by name expressing concern that a historically significant automobile was being held in an unspecialized facility by someone without the credentials or means to ensure its preservation. The language was careful enough to avoid specific insult, but the implication was clear. The car was in the wrong hands. Tyler showed it to Malik without comment. Malik read it once. "He's conflating possession with comprehension," he said. "He thinks that because he can buy it, he understands it. Sure, but Imani might see it." That one landed. Malik was quiet. "She already saw something on your phone last week," he said. "She asked me why people say bad things about someone they don't know." "What did you tell her?" "I told her they weren't saying it about me. They were saying it about who they thought I was. And that those are different people." Tyler looked at him. "That's actually a good answer." She thought about it for a second. Then she said, "So we just know you're not that person and that's enough?" And I said yes. And she said okay and went back to her drawing. He paused. "She's already better at this than I am." Elise Warren was a 43-year-old independent automotive historian who had built her practice on the principle that accuracy was worth more than affiliation. She worked for no auction house on retainer. She had been called as a witness in 2 legal proceedings involving disputed automotive provenance, and by general consensus, she was the best person currently doing it. She arrived at the garage on a Tuesday morning in a gray hatchback, carrying a tote bag full of measuring instruments and a flashlight with 3 different lens attachments. She shook Malik's hand, nodded at Tyler, looked at Imani in the corner. "You draw cars?" Elise asked. "Mostly this one," Imani said, holding up the sketchbook. Elise looked at the drawing, not with the slightly elevated pitch adults use when complimenting children, but the way she would look at a document she found accurate and useful. "That's a very good drawing," she said. Imani went back to drawing. Elise examined the car for 4 hours. The garage fell into the rhythm of it. Elise with her lights and instruments, Malik on hand to answer questions, Tyler making coffee and staying out of the way, Arthur watching on a video tablet propped against a parts bin, speaking occasionally when something on screen caught his attention. It was Arthur who named the moment. Elise had found, under the inner door sill, a small stamped symbol, the mark of the coach building shop that had worked on the car's body. She photographed it at high magnification. Arthur leaned toward his screen. He was silent for almost 10 seconds. "That's the mark of the shop where I worked," he said, "where Samuel worked." Elise looked at the screen. "You can confirm that. I can show you 20 other examples of that mark from vehicles I worked on personally," he said. "Give me an hour." He was back in 45 minutes with photograph documentation from his flat files. The mark matched. The positioning on the door sill was consistent with that shop's practice. Elise straightened up and looked at Malik. "I need to tell you," she said, "that I came here prepared to be skeptical. It's my job to be skeptical." Malik waited. "I'm not skeptical anymore," she said. The provisional conclusion was this: Lot 47, purchased by Malik Carter for $500, was with very high probability the Valenti Aurelia GT-S, chassis number 7, built in Turin in 1964, believed destroyed in 1981, and missing from all verifiable records for more than 40 years. Its restoration value was estimated somewhere north of $20 million. Its historical value was considered, in Elise's written statement, to be distinct from and additional to any monetary figure. That history included the documented involvement of Samuel Carter, a Black American craftsman working in the European coach-building tradition, whose contribution to this specific vehicle had not previously been recorded, and whose participation in that craft tradition had been largely invisible in the published literature of the field. She published her preliminary findings on her professional website. The response came from several directions at once. Margaret Sterling called Malik's phone so many times in a single day that he eventually forwarded the number to Tyler to handle. Sterling House's lawyer sent a letter more conciliatory in tone, withdrawing the earlier provenance challenge. Lawrence Whitmore issued a statement through a publicist that used the phrase historically significant 4 times and did not mention Malik by name. The collector forums responded with the particular energy that emerges when people realize a narrative they believed complete had been missing a person. Threads ran long with people discussing Samuel Carter, asking where his other work might be found, arguing about who had been allowed into the coach-building world and who had been erased from its documentation. Margaret Sterling arrived at the garage on a Friday morning, alone. No lawyer, no assistant. She drove herself, parked on the street, and walked in the way people walk when they have decided that whatever posture they usually maintain is not going to serve them in what comes next. She was wearing a charcoal coat and no jewelry, and she looked like she had not slept especially well in recent days. Malik removed the tarpaulin when she arrived. She stood in front of the car and looked at it for a long time. "I need to tell you something honestly," she said. Malik waited. "When I look at this car now, I see it differently. I can't entirely explain what changed." "The car didn't change. You found what was already there." She paused. "I think what changed is what I understand about what I missed." "You didn't miss it," Malik said. "Your appraiser looked at a photograph and wrote damaged and moved on." "Yes." "And nobody thought to ask whether the person who bought it for $500 might know something the appraiser didn't." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the most direct way you could have put that." "I know. You're not wrong." She turned to face him. Something in her expression was closer to unguarded than she typically allowed herself to be. "What do you want?" she asked. Not as a negotiating question, as a genuine one. Malik had thought about this on the nights he'd slept in the chair, and the mornings he'd watched Imani eat cereal before school, and the times he'd stood in front of the car alone in the quiet of the garage. "I want the story told correctly," he said, "from the beginning, including the part where the room laughed." He listed his conditions without aggression. Sterling House would issue a public statement acknowledging the cataloging error and acknowledging Malik as the discoverer. The restoration would proceed under Malik's direction, with Elise as historical advisor and Arthur as technical consultant. Samuel Carter's name would appear in the vehicle's official provenance record, wherever it could be substantiated. The first public exhibition would benefit a fund to be established in Samuel Carter's name, providing training and tools for young people from underserved communities pursuing careers in automotive craftsmanship. "The fund," Margaret said. "Sterling House would sponsor it? Contribute to it," Malik said. "Sponsoring implies ownership. It's not yours to own." She absorbed this. "All right," she said. When Lawrence made his final offer, $15 million, delivered through a third party, Malik declined without deliberation. Lawrence sent a message that said, "You will never belong to this world." Malik did not reply. But later, in the garage, he said aloud to no one in particular, "My father left his handprints in this world before that man bought his first car." The public announcement was made the following week. Articles were written. A documentary filmmaker reached out. The exhibition was held at Sterling House on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the auction. Malik had requested the car be displayed before restoration, still partially charred so that anyone who came would see it as it had been when the room had laughed. A placard beside the car read, "Valenti Aurelia GT-S, Chassis 7, built Turin, 1964. Discovered by Malik Carter, independent mechanic and restoration specialist. Coachwork attributed in part to Samuel Carter, Philadelphia, 1939-2016. Imani stood in front of that placard for a long time. She read it once, then again. "They spelled Grandpa's name," she said. "Yes," Malik said, "and they spelled your name." "Yes." She thought about this. "Are you glad?" Malik looked at his father's name, set in clean serif type on a card in the room where the room had laughed. "Yes," he said. When Malik was asked to say a few words, he went to the podium without enthusiasm for the format. He was not a man who sought stages, but he had agreed because Imani had asked him to, and because his father deserved someone to say something true in this particular room. "The morning of the auction," he said, "nobody in this room, looked at that car the way it deserved to be looked at. I'm not saying that as criticism of anyone specifically. I'm saying that all of us, our field, had decided that a burned car at a $500 opening bid was already known, already categorized. We thought we already understood what we were looking at. The room was quiet. I wasn't smarter than the people in this room that morning. I had different information, specific, personal information, I'd inherited from my father, who learned it from his hands and from men like Arthur Bellamy. That's not expertise I bought. It's expertise passed to me across a kitchen table and a garage floor and more phone calls than I can count. He paused. What I want us to take from this is not that any one person's eye is better than another's. It's that we were too comfortable trusting the catalog. And catalogs are written by people who are also limited by what they know. He stepped back from the podium. Arthur sent a video from England that was played for the room. He confirmed the coach building shop's mark. He confirmed Samuel's involvement with GT-S number 7. He said, in the careful and precise way of a man who had chosen his words over many days. Samuel told me once, when we were working on that car, that he wanted his son to know his hands had been here. I don't think Samuel ever imagined it would be this son, finding this car, in this room. But I believe he would not be surprised. Malik had been holding himself very carefully for the last hour. At Arthur's words, something in the careful structure gave slightly. Amani, standing beside him, took his hand. Later, after the crowd had thinned, Malik and Amani walked one more time around the car. She had her sketchbook. She stopped at the rear quarter panel and made a quick drawing. Just the curve of the wheel arch, the shape her grandfather's hands had helped define decades before she was born. "Daddy," she said, without looking up. "That man from the front of the room, the one who laughed. What about him? He wanted to buy the car after, when he found out." "He did." She drew the curve a second time, slightly differently. Why would someone laugh at something and then want to have it? Malik thought about how to answer that in a way that was true, and that a 6-year-old could carry. "Because he wasn't laughing at the car," he said. "He was laughing at what he thought the car was. Once he found out what it actually was, he wanted it for that reason instead. So he was always going to want it. He just had the wrong information." Something like that. Imani considered this, still drawing. So the problem was the wrong information. Part of it. What's the other part? Malik looked at the car. At the burned aluminum skin and the warped frame and the frozen tears of melted glass. He wasn't willing to sit with the uncertainty long enough to find the right information, he said. He made a decision quickly so he didn't have to keep looking. Imani looked up from the sketchbook. She looked at the car. She looked at her father. "You sat with it," she said. "Yes, for 15 seconds in the room, and then for days in the garage." "Yes." She looked back at her drawing. She added a small detail to the wheel arch, a slight shading that suggested the hammerwork underneath, the texture that could only be seen if you held a light at exactly the right angle. "I want to learn how to do that," she said. "Not just with cars." Malik looked at her drawing. "You already do," he said. Several months passed in the particular way that months pass when life is full but not dramatic. The garage returned to its ordinary rhythms. Tyler ran a basic restoration class on Saturday mornings, 3 students, none of them more than 22, 2 from the neighborhood. Elise sent occasional projects. The fund had received its first contributions and was establishing its first apprenticeship placements. The Valenti GT-S remained in the garage, under its tarpaulin, not yet fully restored. The restoration was proceeding slowly, which was the only appropriate pace for something that had waited this long. Malik worked on it in the evenings, after clients were gone, and Imani was settled, carefully and without hurry, the way his father had taught him to work on things that mattered. One evening, late, Imani found him there. She had come from the back office in her pajamas, carrying Gray, because she had heard the sound of tools and known where he was. She climbed onto a crate he kept near the car and sat there while he worked. After a while she took her sketchbook from under her arm and made a drawing. When she held it up, he set down the tool and looked. She had drawn the car in 2 halves, one side still burned and charred, the other side gleaming, restored, the aluminum catching light that came from somewhere above the frame of the picture. It was not realistic. It was something better than realistic. What the car had been, and what it was becoming, held in the same image simultaneously. At the bottom, in the labored printed capitals of a child proud of her writing, she had written 4 words, "Not dead, still here." Malik carried the drawing to the wall and pinned it beside the photograph of his father. He turned off the overhead light. The single work lamp remained on, its beam falling across the car's aluminum surface at a low angle, picking out the texture of the hammerwork, the evidence of hands, the record of someone who had been here, and left something that was not supposed to survive, and had survived anyway. Imani had fallen asleep on the crate, Gray pressed to her chest. He lifted her gently, the way you lift a sleeping child, careful and slow, alert to the balance of her. He carried her to the back office, and laid her on the cot, and covered her with the fleece blanket. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her. Then he went back to the garage, and sat in front of the car. He was not going to work any more tonight, he was just going to sit with it. There are things the world decides, in its collective hurry and confidence, have been used up, burned through, spent, not worth a second look. There are people too, and the logic applied to them is the same logic applied to Lot 47, a quick appraisal, a category assigned, a value stated and closed. The world moves on. It has 71 other lots to get through. What Malik Carter understood, the way he understood the language of hand-formed metal, and the difference between what a catalog says and what a material knows, was that the world's hurry does not change the thing itself. The Valenti GT-S had been worth what it was worth on the morning of the auction, before anyone bid on it. Samuel Carter's hands had been in the world's heritage, long before anyone wrote his name down. Lena had loved well, and lived briefly, and her love persisted in a 6-year-old girl, who drew the truth of things in felt-tip pen, and said hi to her grandfather, through the skin of a burned car. None of that had required anyone's permission. The room had laughed. Malik had raised his hand. These two things were not in conflict. They were just the record of what had happened, who had been willing to keep looking, and who had already decided they knew enough to stop. The work light hummed softly. The car held its shape in the quiet. Somewhere under the tarpaulin, under the carbon and the fire damage, and the decades of accumulated wrong assumption, the aluminum that Samuel Carter's hands had touched was exactly as it had always been. Still there. Still waiting for someone patient enough to listen.